That dangerous supplement. How people will cry out against me. I hear from afar the shouts of that false wisdom which is ever dragging us onwards, counting the present as nothing, and pursuing without a pause a future which flies as we pursue, that false wisdom which removes us from our place and never brings us to any other meal. All the papers which I have collected to fill the gaps in my memory and to guide me in my undertaking, have passed into other hands, and will never return to mine. Confessions. I have implied it repeatedly. The praise of living speech, as it preoccupies Levi Strauss's discourse, is faithful to only one particular motif in Rousseau. This motif comes to terms with and is organized by its contrary, a perpetually reanimated mistrust with regard to the so-called full speech. In the spoken address, presence is at once promised and refused. The speech that Rousseau raised above writing is speech as it should be, or rather as it should have been. And we must pay attention to that mode, to that tense which relates us to presence within living colloquy. In fact, Rousseau had tested the concealment within speech itself, in the mirage of its immediacy. He had recognized and analyzed it with incomparable acumen. We are dispossessed of the longed-for presence in the gesture of language by which we attempt to seize it. To the experience of the robber Rob that Stravinsky admirably describes in L'Oeil Vivant Paris, 1961. Jean-Jacques is subjected not only in the play of the mirror image which captures his reflection and exposes his presence, PLX. It lies in wait for us from the first word. The speculary dispossession which at the same time institutes and deconstitutes me is also a law of language. It operates as a power of death in the heart of living speech, a power all the more redoubtable because it opens as much as it threatens the possibility of the spoken word. Having in a certain way recognized this power which, inaugurating speech, dislocates the subject that it constructs, prevents it from being present to its signs, torments its language with a complete writing, Rousseau is nevertheless more pressed to exorcise it than to assume its necessity. That is why, straining toward the reconstruction of presence, he valorizes and disqualifies writing at the same time. At the same time, that is to say, in one divided but coherent movement. We must try not to lose sight of its strange unity. Rousseau condemns writing as destruction of presence and as disease of speech. He rehabilitates it to the extent that it promises the reappropriation of that of which speech allowed itself to be dispossessed. But by what, if not already a writing older than speech and already installed in that place? The first movement of this desire is formulated as a theory of language. The other governs the experience of the writer. In the Confessions, when Jean-Jacques tries to explain how he became a writer, he describes the passage to writing as the restoration, by a certain absence and by a sort of calculated effacement, of presence disappointed of itself in speech. To write is indeed the only way of keeping or recapturing speech, since speech denies itself as it gives itself. Thus an economy of signs is organized. It will be equally disappointing, closer yet to the very essence and to the necessity of disappointment. One cannot help wishing to master absence, and yet we must always let go. Stravinsky describes the profound law that commands the space within which Rousseau must move. How will he overcome the misunderstanding that prevents him from expressing himself according to his true value? How escape the risks of improvised speech? To what other mode of communication can he come? By what other means manifest himself? Jean-Jacques chooses to be absent and to write. Paradoxically, he will hide himself, to show himself better, and he will confide in written speech. I would love society like others, if I were not sure of showing myself not only at a disadvantage, but as completely different from what I am. The part that I have taken of writing and hiding myself is precisely the one that suits me. If I were present, one would never know what I was worth. Confessions. The admission is singular and merits emphasis. Jean-Jacques breaks with others, only to present himself to them in written speech. Protected by solitude, he will tum and retum his sentences at leisure. Point 1. Let us note that the economy is perhaps indicated in the following. The operation that substitutes writing for speech also replaces presence by value. To the I am or to the I am present thus sacrificed, a what I am or a what I am worth is preferred. If I were present, one would never know what I was worth. I renounce my present life, my present and concrete existence in order to make myself known in the ideality of truth and value. A well-known schema. The battle by which I wish to raise myself above my life even while I retain it, in order to enjoy recognition, is in this case within myself, and writing is indeed the phenomenon of this battle. Such would be the writing lesson in Jean-Jacques' existence. The act of writing would be essentially, and here in an exemplary fashion, the great dangerous supplement. Sacrifice aiming at the greatest symbolic reappropriation of presence. From this point of view, Rousseau knew that death is not the simple outside of life. Death by writing also inaugurates life. I can certainly say that I never began to live, until I looked upon myself as a dead man. Confessions, Book 6 po 236. As soon as one determines it within the system of this economy, is not the sacrifice a literary suicide dissipated in the appearance? Is it anything but a symbolic reappropriation? Does it not renounce the present and the proper in order to master them better in their meaning, in the ideal form of truth, of the presence of the present and of the proximity or property of the proper? We would be obliged to decide that a ruse and an appearance are necessary if in fact we were to abide by these concepts: sacrifice, expenditure, renunciation, symbol, appearance, truth, etc., which determine what we here call economy in terms of truth and appearance, starting from the opposition presence/absence. But the work of writing and the economy of difference will not be dominated by this classical conceptuality, this ontology, or this epistemology. On the contrary, these furnish its hidden premises. Difference does not resist appropriation, it does not impose an exterior limit upon it. Difference began by broaching alienation and it ends by leaving reappropriation breached. Until death. Death is the movement of difference to the extent that that movement is necessarily finite. This means that difference makes the opposition of presence and absence possible. Without the possibility of difference, the desire of presence as such would not find its breathing space. That means by the same token that this desire carries in itself the destiny of its non-satisfaction. Difference produces what it forbids, makes possible the very thing that it makes impossible. If difference is recognized as the obliterated origin of absence and presence, major forms of the disappearing and the appearing of the entity, it would still remain to be known if being, before its determination into absence or presence, is already implicated in the thought of difference. And if difference as the project of the mastery of the entity should be understood with reference to the sense of being, can one not think the converse? Since the sense of being is never produced as history outside of its determination as presence, has it not always already been caught within the history of metaphysics as the epoch of presence? This is perhaps what Nietzsche wanted to write, and what resists the Heideggerian reading of Nietzsche. Difference in its active movement. What is comprehended in the concept of difference without exhausting it is what not only precedes metaphysics but also extends beyond the thought of being. The latter speaks nothing other than metaphysics, even if it exceeds it and thinks it as what it is within its closure.